But there is something I wanted to mention because I've seen this happen a number of times. Some of you might have experienced it to some extent. That, the good news, I guess you could say, is that anybody can awaken. What I mean by that is, you don't have to have your act together. You don't have to become a perfect person. You don't actually have to change anything. All that's required is to kind of just let go and let something happen. It's get your hands off the steering wheel. Stop trying to control yourself and make things happen, and relax a little bit. And we don't awaken because we've exhibited great behavior. That doesn't mean we shouldn't endeavor to behave ourselves and live a moral and ethical life, but that doesn't necessarily get in the way of awakening. We can be a quite divided, upset, confused ego and awaken. Here's the other part of the story, however, that when we go in the deeper domains of being, especially when we get into the archetypal realm of being, and I don't mean like just having like dreams that are archetypal in nature. That's important for those of you who are into that. But I'm talking about real conscious plunges into the beyond the archetypal, into the ground of being and into the archetype. There is a danger with it, as there is a danger with everything in life, right? Everything you do has some element of risk, I suppose. Every time you get in your car does. Is when we go into the deeper domains of being, it's really a good idea if we've done enough, I guess you could say, work on ourselves so that our ego is somewhat coherent, not deeply divided and at war with itself. You can get access to these deeper domains, even if your ego's super divided, but there's one of the reasons I suggest people do meditation regularly, is because it builds this capacity in you. It builds this reservoir of, well, on the surface, it builds this reservoir of peace. So you can internally resource a kind of peaceful or calm or centeredness. And that's really nice as a human being to have that available to you. On a deeper level, it's creating a capacity, because meditation is the practice of differentiating, not getting caught in your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions, not excluding them, right? Not trying to deny them, but not being possessed by them, right? The normal state, what we think of as normal state for human beings, is really a state where they're more or less, to a great extent, possessed by what they think and what they feel. In other words, they are what they think, and they don't possess their emotions possess them, right? A healthy ego, a more integrated ego, is not possessed so much. They have their thoughts instead of their thoughts having them, and they have their emotional experiences instead of their emotional experiences overwhelming them and possessing them. This ability, this kind of stable ego ability, comes in really handy, because as you go more and more in the deeper dimensions of your being, because you're getting way under the surface, you need some real stability to be with you. So just innate stability of being is really a useful thing to have. The kind of stability that's often built through meditation. Not only through meditation, I think vast majority of people that I see, I've often thought, gee, I'd love everybody to be in really good therapy for a year or two before they come to me. Psychotherapy, it would be really, really good for them. Yeah, it would make my job easier, but that's not really the reason. The reason is I think that it would solve them. So there's lots of ways that we can get the ego more coherent, because one of the risks we take when we go, especially go into the archetypal realm, is you can get sort of possessed by the deep energies and instincts of the archetypal domain, right? You can, In other words, your ego can be sort of overwhelmed, and before you know it, your ego thinks that it's God. If the truth of your being recognizes itself as divine, that's one thing. But when the ego is overcome by an archetypal energy or instinct, you can get possessed by it, and all of a sudden your ego thinks it's God. Or you get taken by some of the energy, the archetypal energy, Shakti or Shiva, and all of a sudden you think, I am Shiva, and you're dancing all over the place. And you've been possessed by that energy. It's got you until it lets go of you. But if you have a stability, you can realize, I am Shakti, but you're not possessed by it. Like, that energy is not separate from me. Right? To realize that energy is not separate from me. It's a deep dimension of my being. Then you are having the experience instead of the experience having you. So that kind of stability comes in handy as we go into the deeper realms, and especially when we go into the numinous ground, because from the mind's point of view, it is a kind of abyss of nothingness, which can be very frightening. For a lot of people, I get asked about this all the time when I'm teaching. People come up to these inner experiences of void, or just come upon this like dimension of nothingness, and they're at once compelled into it, but also terrified of it, because right there is the undifferentiated ground of their being. It's literally unimaginable, and it is infinite, and it can feel like it's going to devour you. So our mind often projects a lot of its own darkest impulses and projections into the unknown, and all of a sudden the unknown looks pretty scary, where actually the unknown is just the ground of your being. It's freedom itself. It's freedom itself, right? But when you have a kind of stability, it's easier to let go when you are letting go from a stable place. And to let go in such a way that you can recognize an identity with what you open to, but you're not possessed by it. And so, hence the reason that I suggest that people do meditation, not only so it gives you access to these deeper dimensions, but so that it builds a kind of capacity of stability within you, which is just really good in life, period, but it becomes really good when you go into these deeper domains of being. To let go from a stable place it's a lot easier than letting go from an unstable place, and it's more predictable, let's put it that way. So, I'm not saying this to frighten anybody, but sometimes people have a little bit too casual an attitude about all this. And, in non-duality, to have your ego together often is kind of thought of as, well, you're just sort of wasting your time. You're not your ego anyway. And there's part of that that's true, but also, it takes a pretty strong empirical self, whatever you're going to call that, to actually embody the depth of our being. It takes a stable human being to successfully embody your own realization. So in that sense, it may not define you, but it's, as I said, the positive part of ego is a function. And to have that differentiating, discriminating, strong function is really useful in spirituality. And that's why so many spiritual traditions, almost throughout all traditions, will do something to try to engender that a deeper stability. It's kind of ironic, though, because you're building and strengthening something that at the same time you're letting go of, right? So it is a paradox, I'll grant you that, right? I'm strengthening and building something that then I'm also letting go of, but the closer we get to reality, the more paradoxical it gets. And so our mind has to become a mind that can embrace paradox, rather than always trying to come to some final conclusion on one side of an opposite or the other side. Because all my experience of reality has always been this coming together, this embracing of the opposites. You see that both sides actually have a truthfulness to them. They go together, and yes, then they eventually sort of enter into the undifferentiated state of being at the ground of our being prior to the opposites, but we will always be functioning in the world of opposites. And the embodiment seeks a way so that which is not an opposite can